So if we're talking about biotin B1 and B6, the order should be biotin B1 and B6. So B6 is your last if you're coming at this cold and you're wanting to start from the beginning. And I would actually argue we even want to start back a little bit further than these three big guns and start with things that are going to set the stage for when these other B vitamins arrive. So for a lot of us, what we need are cofactors that are going to support your use of those big B vitamins. So B1 on its own isn't going to do as much for you as if you have set the stage for B1 usage to be as optimal as possible. And same with biotin and the same with B6. So let me start back a little bit further from the big guns and say, if we're going to implement B1 first or biotin first, what we really want to do is come in with a small dose and again, slowly ramp up with whoever we're bringing on board first. And in order to support the use specifically of B1 and B6, you want to start with some cofactors that are going to help you use those. Biggest cofactors for B1 look to be alpha lipoic acid and our friend magnesium. So starting back out ahead of these big guns, which are going to have more impact, we start with alpha lipoic acid. What alpha lipoic acid does is essentially help to get B1 into the cell where the work needs to be done. So you can kind of think of it as like a best friend who takes your hand and says, come on, we can do this. So ALA does that for B1. And it's also helpful on its own. ALA can help with things like better blood sugar balance, so better usage of the energy that you're taking in. And it's also an antioxidant. So it's not that you don't get any benefits from the ALA on its own. So it can be a great place to start that's gentler than B1 and setting the stage. Often after ALA, I would go to B2. B2 is going to set the stage for B6. And the interesting new research I've just read about B2 says that B2 actually helps to reduce histamine in the body. So for those of us who have oxalate issues, we will often also have some degree of histamine issue because oxalate's disturbing the mast cells and then they become more reactive. So if you've got some B2 on board, it's going to give you benefits long before you ever get to B6, but it, like ALA, is B6 friendly and helps to get it into the cell. So if we start with these things that are easier to implement but also set the stage, then we're building up a platform, a foundation to build on. So ALA, B2, you don't have to have huge doses of B2. But the nice thing about B2 is it doesn't build up in your system. This is the one that if you've ever taken a multivitamin, you will recognize because it's the one that makes your urine bright yellow or slightly orange. So it's the neon urine B vitamin. And taking a little bit of this can give you all kinds of benefits. It's also very calming to the nervous system, but helping bring this histamine down is really good as a setup. And then the fact that when B2 is available, we're more likely to get B6 into the cell. That's what we want. So where do we go from ALA and B2? Then I would go to biotin. Biotin is going to need magnesium as a cofactor. We should really be starting with minerals as job one, as I've said many times, I think now on the Patreon group. So magnesium is a cofactor for so many things. It should just be a basic that we're trying to get more magnesium into the system. And technically, I would do that before ALA and B2. Minerals first. ALA, B2, biotin. Biotin is also something which contributes to how well B1 works in the body. So there's another connection between biotin and B1. So we're setting up for B1 and it is very helpful to the gut. So we are going to talk about biotin and candida, which would be further down after you've got some of this stuff implemented. So biotin is really important to a number of enzymes that help your immune system talk to the gut microbiome. And oxalate disrupts biotin's function directly. So it directly disrupts the building of these enzymes that are based on biotin. So that means the conversation between the gut and the immune system has been muted. It's like we've turned down the volume and now it can hardly hear each other. That's a problem because our I'm going to say, very responsive part of our immune system, which can be changed more easily, is going to be based on what the gut can do. The gut microbiome can swing a little bit in ways that I'm going to argue our genetics have a little more difficulty doing. Like our genetics is solid, then we have epigenetics that can shift, can move, can turn genes on and off. But our microbiome is this more responsive, more resilient. We can switch the balance of what's going on in the gut in response to food, in response to environment. So that conversation between our immune system and the gut's been turned down so that the gut can hardly hear the immune system anymore. Why is this a problem? The gut's starting to do things without direction from us. And the gut microbiome will start to respond to the abundance of oxalate in the system. And so that starts to shift our gut microbiome in a way which is helpful in the sense that it's going to start to bias towards things that use oxalate as fuel, but may not be helpful in terms of our overall health. So biotin helps to reestablish that communication. And again, start slowly. Biotin is one that we do not need very much of. So RDA for biotin is, I believe, 150 micrograms. It's really tiny. So often capsules will start at 250 or 500 micrograms. And while that seems really tiny to us, it's actually a fairly sizable dose. So some people may need to come in with a very tiny initial dose, and that may be enough at first, but ramping it up may help over the long term. And I'll get back to that when we talk about candida. Okay, so now we've got our minerals, especially magnesium. We've got ALA and B2, we've got biotin. The next thing you would put in place is B1. And this daisy chain of magnesium to ALA to biotin to B1 sets your system up so that it can use the B1 as efficiently and effectively as possible. So biotin processes support the use of B1 in the body. Really important. So what we want to do is make sure that, we've got some biotin available so that the B1 and its biochemistry can lean into and use a bit more biotin in order to make best use of the B1. Really important, really helpful. So we've set up this daisy chain to make sure that we get the most out of our B1. Again, I would start slowly. I would not necessarily go straight to the highest powered B1. Some people want to go straight to TTFD. I would not do that. I would start with conventional thiamine generally and not too big a dose, and then maybe go to something like benfotiamine, which is a fat soluble thiamine. So you start to establish kind of a baseline of thiamine that's available in the body and isn't susceptible to this business of being excreted by the kidneys without being used. We kind of want to make sure that you've got some that's going to hang around for a little while. And then perhaps you move to TTFD. So B1's not a one size fits all. It's going to depend a lot on what works best with your system. And very often something like TTFD is not your immediate move because a lot of us can be sulfur intolerant as part of what oxalate's done to us. So you can have some nuanced moves even within the area of B1 because you have these different forms you might be looking at. So I would generally start with thiamine HCl, which is the most common conventional form. And again, still work up to a dose slowly. You might want to start at 25 or 50 milligrams. And if that's still too much, then there are specialized products that do lower doses than that because it's definitely got to fit the unique profile for you, which is going to depend not just on your genetics, but also on your health history, what your diet's been like, where your weak points are. All of these will make a difference. So last in the lineup of the big guns would be B6. And I definitely want to argue that as much as B6, there's a lot of discussion about it. If you put it down the line and you've built this nice structure and support for your system first, then you're more likely to get some better bang for the buck out of B6. And while there's been a lot of talk on many groups and a lot of research on higher doses of B6, there's this growing concern with things like B6 toxicity. So having the B2 out in front, so they've got plentiful B2 in the body for when your B6 is added, means that you're more likely to get that into the cells. And the reason you want it in the cells, you want it being used. When accumulates in the bloodstream, it can start to cause problems. I've had clients who have had to deal with B6 toxicity. There is a way out for that, in my opinion. I don't have research to show this, but I have put clients on B2 and had them fully stop any supplementation of B6 and had the B6 in their bloodstream start to steadily drop. The problem really with B6 toxicity is that when people don't do something to get that B6 into the cells, it looks like the kidneys have no mechanism to get rid of it because B6 is so critical to your metabolism, and that it just stays hanging around in the bloodstream. So the get out of jail free card for those who do start to deal with B6 is stop all B6 supplementation and take B2. And that does seem to help. But once you've developed B6 tolerance once, I would be very careful with dosing ever. And I would always take B2 to make sure it's getting into the cell. Nutrients in the bloodstream are available for tissues to take up. If those things are not being taken up out of the bloodstream, then we're essentially highlighting that there's a problem there. So that would be where I'd start with individual Bs. And you might have a question like, why wouldn't we take a B complex? And I made this mistake a lot. I made it with me as well, early in the days of doing this diet. And if the B complex doesn't work for you, we have no idea why it's not working. So if we start with individual Bs, at some point, can you move to a B complex and perhaps have everything done in a quite simple way as opposed to having to juggle all sorts of different capsules? Absolutely. But we need to know what's working for you and what's not. And in the beginning, we may need to tailor the doses to what you're specifically dealing with. B complexes can be great. I have some favorite ones. I particularly, for those of you who are curious, like Country Life coenzymated B complex because it's the more bioavailable forms. And for most of the Bs, there's more than one form in the Country Life product. So I like that, but I've never taken a whole capsule of that in my whole life. So I used that once I was through the worst of oxalate dumping and just used a small amount of it, and that was sufficient just to tick the boxes across so that I knew I wasn't missing anything.